The world shrank to the rasp of her own breath and the rough bark scraping her cheek. One moment, there was the rumble of the unseen vehicle, a gruff voice muttering something about burdens, and the slam of a door that echoed like a gunshot in the vast, indifferent quiet of the trees. The next, only the sighing of wind through pine needles, a sound that offered no comfort, no direction. Elara, all of 12 years and a collection of whispered sorrows, pushed herself up from the damp earth. Her small, worn satchel, containing everything she owned, a change of clothes, a cracked wooden bird her mother had carved, and the gnawing emptiness of her stomach, lay beside her like a discarded thought. The forest floor was a tapestry of decaying leaves and tangled roots, an uneven bed that promised only cold. She looked back the way she thought the vehicle had gone, but the trees stood shoulder to shoulder, a silent, impenetrable wall, already erasing the path of her abandonment. There was no road, no sign, only more trees, stretching into a hazy, green-grey infinity. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin, a familiar tormentor. She'd been left before, in cleaner places, institutional rooms with sterile smells and the hushed, pitying tones of strangers. This was different. This was a raw, untamed silence, a place that didn't care if she lived or died. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp soil, felt heavy in her lungs, pressing down the whimper that tried to escape. Her name, Elara, felt like a stone in her mouth, too heavy to speak into the vastness. It was a name that meant nothing here. She was just a girl, lost, a speck of human insignificance swallowed by the wilderness. The sun, a pale disk an hour ago, was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and dying orange through the dense canopy. Shadows lengthened, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque figures. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, sent a jolt of fear through her. She clutched the wooden bird in her pocket, its smooth, worn surface a small, desperate anchor in a sea of terror. Her throat ached with unshed tears, but crying felt like a surrender the forest would welcome. She had to move, but where? Which direction offered anything but more of this suffocating green? The silence where her hope used to live was deafening. Night fell not with a gentle curtain, but like a heavy, smothering blanket. The cold seeped into Elara's bones, a relentless intruder. She found a shallow depression at the base of a thick-trunked oak, its roots like gnarled fingers offering a meager illusion of shelter. She curled into herself, pulling her thin jacket tighter, the satchel hugged to her chest. Sleep was a distant, taunting memory. Her mind replayed the last few weeks, the hushed arguments, the averted gazes, the finality of the car door. They hadn't even looked back. The thought was a fresh stab, sharper than the hunger pangs that twisted her insides. The forest was alive with sounds she couldn't decipher, the hoot of an owl, the distant screech of some unknown creature, the ceaseless whisper of the wind that seemed to carry mocking voices. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to conjure the image of her mother's face, but it was fading, like an old photograph exposed to too much light. The wooden bird was her only tangible link. She traced its delicate wings, its unseeing eyes, a silent conversation with a ghost. When the first hint of grey dawn filtered through the leaves, it found Elara stiff, shivering, and hollowed out by fear. The gnawing in her stomach had become a dull, persistent ache. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that she couldn't stay put. Survival, a word she'd only read in books, now screamed in her mind. She forced herself to her feet, her legs unsteady. Thirst was a burning dryness in her throat. She licked the dew from a broad leaf, the metallic taste unsatisfying but wet. Berries, she thought. Her mother had once shown her pictures of edible berries, but here, every brightly colored cluster looked like a tiny, beautiful poison. She remembered tales of children lost in woods, their small bones found years later. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran down her spine. She stumbled on, pushing aside low-hanging branches that whipped at her face, her eye scanning the forest floor for anything, any sign. The day wore on, a relentless cycle of hope and despair. She found a muddy puddle and drank, ignoring the earthy taste, the fear of unseen things lurking in the murky water. Hunger drove her to chew on the tender inner bark of a young birch, a bitter, unsatisfying meal. Each step was an effort, her small body protesting. The sun climbed, beat down, and began to dip again, and the forest remained stubbornly, terrifyingly the same. It was a labyrinth designed to break her. She was a mouse in its green, indifferent maze, and exhaustion was a predator, slowly closing in. The silence of the trees was no longer just an absence of sound, it was an active presence, pressing against her, trying to erase her. Another night, colder than the first, deeper in its despair. Elara huddled beneath a rocky overhang, the stone leaching warmth from her already chilled body. The wooden bird felt like ice in her hand. She wondered if anyone, anywhere, was thinking of her. If her absence was even a ripple in someone's world. The thought was a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. She was fading, she could feel it, the small flame of her spirit flickering low. With the dawn of the third day, a sliver of resolve, born of sheer desperation, pushed her onward. She had to keep moving. To stop was to accept the end. Her feet were blistered, her clothes torn, her face smudged with dirt and tears she no longer had the energy to wipe away. And then, through a break in the trees, a straight line. Unnatural in this chaotic wilderness. A fence. Old, weathered cedar post strung with rusted barbed wire, but a fence nonetheless. It meant people. It meant a boundary. It meant, possibly, an end to this endless, terrifying green. A surge of adrenaline, weak but potent, straightened her spine. She stumbled towards it, her breath catching in her throat. The fence stretched away in both directions, a thin, man-made scar on the landscape. Which way? She chose right, for no reason other than it felt marginally less daunting. She followed the fence line, her hand occasionally brushing against the rough wood of a post, a tactile connection to a world she thought she'd lost. The going was slow, her body screaming in protest with every step. The sun beat down, and the forest seemed to mock her renewed hope, its shadows deeper, its silence more profound. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. Time had lost its meaning. She was focused on the next step, the next post, the next breath. Her vision blurred. The fence wavered. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. Her knees buckled. The ground rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a dusty boot, large and worn, planted firmly on the earth beside her head. The world dissolved into a merciful blackness, the scent of dust and dry grass her last sensation. A gruff sound, like stones grinding together, pulled Elara from the depths. She lay on something soft, something that wasn't the forest floor. A blanket, rough but clean, covered her. Her eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. A shadowed ceiling, wooden beams. The smell of wood smoke and something savory. Pain, dull and throbbing, radiated through her body. "Awake, are you?" The voice was low, gravelly, like the man's boot she vaguely remembered. She turned her head, a slow, aching movement. An old man sat in a simple wooden chair a few feet away, watching her. His face was a road map of wrinkles, weathered by sun and wind, his eyes the color of a winter sky, sharp and discerning beneath bushy gray eyebrows. He wore a faded denim shirt and worn jeans, his hands, gnarled and calloused, resting on his knees. Fear, a cold companion, stirred within her. "Where?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "My place," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Found you by the south fence." Looked like a bundle of rags the coyotes hadn't gotten to yet. His words were blunt, yet not unkind. There was a weariness in them, an acceptance of harsh realities. Elara tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down. "Easy now," he said, a hint of something softer in his tone. "Been out for a good spell. You need water." Food. He rose slowly, his movements economical, and went to a small stove in the corner of the room. The cabin was small, sparsely furnished but clean. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, a single bed in the corner where she now lay. It was a place of solitude, of self-reliance. He returned with a tin cup of water. Sip it slow she did, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. He watched her, his expression unreadable. "What's a little thing like you doing out in the deep woods alone?" Elara swallowed, the water easing the rawness. The truth felt too big, too shameful. Lost, she managed, the word a pathetic summary of her ordeal. His eyes seemed to see more than she said. He grunted, a non-committal sound. Lot of lost out here leads to gone for good. He ladled stew from a pot on the stove into a bowl. The aroma made her stomach clench with a painful, urgent hunger. He set it on a small crate beside the bed, along with a piece of dark bread. Eat, he commanded, not unkindly. Named Silas, he didn't ask for hers, not yet. He simply stated his own, a fact laid down like a stone. Ilara ate slowly, mechanically at first, then with a growing desperation, the warm stew and bread chasing away the worst of the hollow ache. Silas sat back in his chair, cleaning a hunting knife with an oiled rag, his movements precise, unhurried. The silence in the cabin was different from the silence of the forest. This was a human silence, punctuated by the crackle of the fire, the scrape of her spoon against the bowl, the rhythmic whisk of his rag on steel. It was a silence that observed, that waited. When she finished, she set the bowl aside, her eyelids heavy. A fragile warmth spread through her, the first she'd felt in days. But the fear remained, a cold knot beneath the surface. Who was this man? What did he want? People who helped usually wanted something, or they eventually tired of the burden. She knew that pattern well. Thank you, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the rough blanket. Silas nodded, not looking up from his knife. Sleep now. You need it. He didn't press her for answers, didn't ask where she came from, who she belonged to. His patience was a strange, unnerving thing. She was used to probing questions, to the pitying looks that made her feel like a broken doll. This quiet acceptance, this simple offering of shelter and food without immediate demand, left her adrift. She closed her eyes, the image of his weathered face, his steady hands, imprinted on her mind. Was this a reprieve, or just another temporary stop before the next abandonment? The exhaustion was too profound to allow for much worry. Sleep claimed her again, a heavy, dreamless void, but this time, there was a roof over her head, and the distant, comforting scent of wood smoke. When she woke, sunlight streamed through a small, grime-streaked window. Silas was gone. Panic flickered, but a bowl of porridge sat on the crate, still warm, covered with a tin plate. A note, scrawled in surprisingly neat letters on a piece of brown paper, lay beside it, chores. Back by midday chores. The word was mundane, ordinary. It suggested a routine, a life that continued. She ate the porridge, the rough oat sticking in her throat. The cabin felt empty, yet his presence lingered in the neatness of the few belongings, the order of the small space. She was still wary, her trust a shattered thing, but a tiny seed of curiosity had taken root. What kind of man lived like this, alone, on the edge of such a harsh wilderness? And why had he taken her in? Days bled into a quiet routine. Silas would leave before dawn, returning with the sun high or sometimes not until dusk, his tasks on the ranch vast and solitary. He never asked Ilara to do anything specific, but she began to watch him, her fear slowly giving way to a cautious observation. He moved with a purpose, his body, though old, still strong and capable. He mended fences with practiced hands, chopped wood with a steady rhythm, tended to a few scrawny chickens and a solitary, stoic horse named Gideon. Ilara, driven by an instinct to earn her keep, to not be a complete burden, started with small things. She swept the cabin floor with a worn broom. She washed their 2 bowls and spoons in a bucket of water heated on the stove. She refilled the wood box. Silas would return, glance at her efforts, and grunt, a sound she was beginning to interpret as acknowledgement, perhaps even a grudging approval. One morning, she found him struggling to thread a thick needle with mending twine, his calloused fingers clumsy with the delicate task. Without a word, Ilara took the needle and twine, her smaller, nimbler fingers accomplishing the task in seconds. She handed it back. Silas looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his winter sky eyes, then nodded curtly. Thanks. It was the first time he directly acknowledged her help. After that, the unspoken understanding grew. She'd fetch tools before he asked, hold a fence post steady while he hammered, scatter feed for the squawking chickens. She learned the language of his movements, the subtle cues of his needs. He, in turn, left tasks for her that he knew she could manage, sorting nails, oiling leather, patching a tear in a grain sack. Words remained scarce between them. Their communication was in shared tasks, in the quiet rhythm of work that filled the long days. Ilara found a strange comfort in the labor. It was honest. It was tangible. Mending a fence meant the fence was mended. Feeding the chickens meant they clucked contentedly. There were no hidden meanings, no shifting expectations. The work grounded her, tethered her to this new, stark reality. She was still quiet, her voice rarely rising above a whisper when she did speak, but the crushing weight of fear was slowly, almost imperceptibly, lifting. She was learning the contours of Silas's silence, finding it less a void and more a space filled with unspoken understanding. He never asked about her past, and she never offered. The forest, her tormentor, was now just a dark green line at the edge of the cleared land, held at bay by Silas's fences and his quiet tenacity. One afternoon, the distant rumble of an engine broke the accustomed quiet of the ranch. Ilara, who was mending a tear in one of Silas's old shirts by the cabin door, froze. Vehicles meant outsiders, meant questions, meant the possibility of being taken away. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Silas, who had been sharpening an axe by the woodpile, straightened slowly, his gaze fixed on the dirt track that led to the main road, miles distant. A dusty county sheriff's car, official and imposing, bumped its way into the yard. A stout man in a uniform, Deputy Crawford, climbed out, adjusting his belt. "Silas," he called, his voice carrying an unwelcome authority. "Afternoon, Tom," Silas replied, his tone neutral. He laid the axe down carefully. Crawford's eyes flickered to Ilara, lingering for a moment too long. "Heard talk in town?" "About you having a girl out here." Ilara shrank back, wishing the rough wood of the cabin could swallow her. "Found her," Silas said, his voice flat. "Near starved, up by the south pasture, about a week back," Crawford grunted. "Any idea where she came from?" "Nope." "Don't talk much." Silas's gaze was steady, daring the deputy to challenge him. "Well, Silas, you know the rules. Can't just keep a kid. Social services will have to be notified. She needs to be processed, placed." The words were cold, clinical. Ilara felt the familiar dread wash over her. She was a file, a case number, not a person. "She's getting food. Shelter," Silas stated, his voice taking on a hard edge. "She's safe here. That ain't for you to decide, old man," Crawford said, though with a touch less bluster. He knew Silas. Knew his stubbornness, his isolation. "Look, I gotta make a report. They'll likely send someone out from the county seat in a few days." He looked at Ilara again, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes, quickly masked. "What's your name, girl?" Ilara stared at her feet, the mending forgotten in her lap. The words wouldn't come. "Leave her be, Tom," Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. "She ain't hurting anyone," Crawford sighed, running a hand over his balding head. "All right, Silas. But expect a visit. And you better have some answers for them. Or they'll take her, sure as rain." He climbed back into his car, the dust swirling as he drove away, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Ilara finally looked up at Silas, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't let them take me," she whispered, the words raw with desperation. "Please." Silas looked at her, his weathered face grim. He picked up his axe, the movement slow, deliberate. "Ain't planning on it," he said, his voice a low rumble. But the certainty he projected felt fragile against the looming threat of officialdom. The deputy's visit cast a long shadow over the ranch. The easy rhythm they had found was disrupted by a current of unspoken anxiety. Ilara found it harder to concentrate on her chores, her ears constantly straining for the sound of an approaching vehicle. Sleep became fitful again, haunted by dreams of stern-faced strangers and cold, institutional hallways. Silas, too, seemed more preoccupied, his silence deeper, his brow often furrowed in thought as he stared out towards the distant road. He didn't speak of the impending visit from social services, but it hung between them, an unspoken weight. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the only light in the darkening cabin, Silas broke the silence. "Elara," he said, his voice gentle, a tone he rarely used. She looked up, startled. He seldom used her name. "They'll ask questions. 'Bout where you came from. 'Bout your folks." Elara's gaze dropped to her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. The shame of her abandonment, the raw wound of being unwanted, was a burden she carried deep within. "There's nothing to tell," she mumbled, the old lie feeling thin and inadequate. No folks to speak of. Silas watched her, his eyes holding a profound understanding that made her want to weep. "Everyone comes from somewhere, child. Everyone leaves a trace." He paused, poking at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "Sometimes, the past is a heavy load to carry alone." His words weren't a demand, but an invitation. A quiet offering of space for her story, should she choose to share it. She thought of the countless times she'd been asked, the forms filled out, the sympathetic but ultimately unseeing eyes. But Silas's gaze was different. It didn't pry, it simply held. They didn't want me," she whispered, the admission costing her more than he could know. "Just left me." The words hung in the air, stark and painful. Silas nodded slowly. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. "Some folks ain't fit to have the raising of a pup, let alone a child," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. He looked at her then, a long, steady look. "But being left don't mean you're worthless, Elara. Means they were blind to what they had." He was silent for a moment, then continued, his voice quiet but firm. "This social services fella, he'll want to put you in a home. With strangers." Elara's breath hitched. "I don't want to go, I know," Silas said. He looked around the small, rustic cabin, at the few meager comforts, the evidence of their shared, quiet life. "This ain't much. But it's honest. And it's safe." He met her gaze again. "If you want to stay, if you're willing to call this place home, I'll tell them that." The offer was immense, a lifeline thrown into a turbulent sea. To call this place home? To belong somewhere, with someone? It was a possibility she hadn't dared to dream of. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring his image. You would do that?" "Reckon I would," he said, his voice gruff, almost dismissive of the magnitude of his words. "Been alone a long time. Place could use a bit more life." He looked away then, towards the dying embers of the fire, a flicker of old sorrow in his eyes that Elara, in her own pain, almost missed. He was offering her a place, not out of pity, but perhaps out of a shared understanding of solitude, of loss. The choice was hers. A choice she had never truly had before. A few days later, as predicted, another car, newer and shinier than the deputy's, made its way up the track. A man in a pressed shirt and slacks, carrying a briefcase, stepped out. Mr. Henderson, from Child Protective Services. He had kind eyes, but an air of weary officialdom. Silas met him on the porch, Elara hovering just inside the cabin door, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. "Mr. Silas Blackwood." Henderson offered a hand, which Silas took briefly. "I'm here about the child, Elara." "She's here," Silas said, gesturing vaguely towards the cabin. "Come inside." Henderson stepped into the small space, his gaze taking in the sparse furnishings, Elara's small, tense form. He smiled gently at her. "Hello, Elara. I'm Mr. Henderson. I'm here to help." Elara clutched the wooden bird in her pocket, its familiar shape a small comfort. Help. That word had so many meanings. "Sir," Silas began, his voice steady, "Elara has been with me for near 2 weeks now. She's a good girl. Works hard. Causes no trouble." Henderson nodded, opening his briefcase and taking out a notepad. "I understand she was found abandoned, Mr. Blackwood. That's a serious situation. We need to ensure her safety and well-being, find her a proper placement." "She's safe here," Silas stated, his voice firm. "And her well-being is my concern now." Henderson looked surprised. "Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, you're an elderly man, living alone in considerable isolation. foster care, or a group home, would offer more resources, a more structured environment structure. Silas snorted. She had the structure that dumped her in the woods to die. She has food here. A roof. She's learning. She's starting to heal. He looked at Ilara, a silent question in his eyes. This was her moment. Her voice. Ilara stepped forward, her legs trembling slightly. I want to stay, she said, her voice small but clear, astonishing herself with its steadiness. With Mr. Blackwood, Henderson looked from Silas to Ilara, a flicker of surprise, then consideration, in his eyes. Ilara, do you understand what that means? Mr. Blackwood isn't your legal guardian, he means to be, Silas interjected, his gaze unwavering. I'm old, yes. But I'm fit. This ranch, it's mine. Free and clear. I can provide for her. He paused, then said the words that hung in the air, heavy with significance. I want to adopt her. Henderson was visibly taken aback. Adopt her? Mr. Blackwood, that's a significant commitment. There are procedures, assessments. Then we'll do Silas said, his jaw set. She belongs here. With me. Ilara looked at Silas, her heart swelling with a profound, unexpected gratitude. He was fighting for her, this quiet, solitary man. He was claiming her. Please, Mr. Henderson, she said, finding her voice again, stronger this time. I don't have anyone else. This feels like home. The simple honesty of her plea, combined with Silas's resolute stance, seemed to make an impact. Henderson was silent for a long moment, studying them both. He saw the old man's fierce protectiveness, the girl's desperate hope. He saw the unspoken bond that had formed between them in this remote corner of the world. It's highly irregular, Henderson finally said, though the weariness in his voice was now tinged with something else, perhaps a reluctant empathy. But I will file a report. I will note your intentions, Mr. Blackwood. There will be assessments. Home visits. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Silas replied, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. As Henderson left, promising to be in touch, a quiet sense of victory settled over the small cabin. Ilara looked at Silas, tears finally spilling over, not of sorrow, but of a fragile, burgeoning joy. He simply nodded, then turned towards the woodpile. Would need splitting, he said, his voice back to its usual gruffness. But Ilara understood. It was his way of saying, we'll face what comes. The ensuing months were a series of visits, questions, and paperwork. Mr. Henderson returned, sometimes with a colleague, a woman with kind but searching eyes. They interviewed Silas. They interviewed Ilara, gently probing her past, her feelings, her hopes. Silas, true to his word, navigated the bureaucracy with a quiet, unyielding determination. He produced ancient bank statements, the deed to his land, even a letter from the town doctor attesting to his surprisingly robust health. Ilara, for her part, spoke her truth, simple and direct. She spoke of the fear in the forest, and the safety she found in Silas's cabin. She spoke of the quiet companionship, the purpose she found in the daily chores, the feeling of, for the first time in her life, truly belonging. There were moments of doubt, days when the weight of the process seemed overwhelming. Ilara would see the worry lines deepen on Silas's face and fear would whisper its insidious lies. But Silas never wavered. We see it through, he'd say, his voice firm, and she would draw strength from his stoicism. The ranch itself seemed to conspire in their favor. During one home visit, a sudden storm blew in, and Mr. Henderson found himself temporarily stranded. He witnessed firsthand Silas's capability, Ilara's quiet competence as she helped secure the chickens and bring in extra firewood. He saw the unforced rhythm of their life, the deep, unspoken connection between the old man and the young girl. He saw a home, not just a house. Slowly, miraculously, the wheels of the system began to turn in their favor. The reports were favorable. Silas, despite his age and isolation, was deemed a suitable guardian. His fierce love for Ilara, though rarely spoken aloud, was evident in his every protective gesture, his every provision for her future. Ilara, once a lost and frightened child, was blossoming under his care, her resilience shining through. The day the final papers arrived, Silas opened the official-looking envelope with hands that trembled slightly. He read the contents slowly, his lips moving silently. Then he looked up at Ilara, who stood watching him, her breath held. A slow smile, wider and more genuine than she had ever seen, spread across his weathered face. "Well, girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Looks like you're stuck with me." He handed her the paper. At the top, in formal lettering, it declared Ilara, no last name given, legally adopted by Silas Blackwood. Her name. His name. Linked together. Ilara traced the words with her finger. Ilara Blackwood. It sounded right. It sounded like belonging. It sounded like forever. Life on the Blackwood Ranch settled into a new kind of quiet, one underscored by permanence and a deep, abiding peace. Ilara was no longer the orphaned girl left in the forest, she was Ilara Blackwood, Silas's daughter. The shadows of her past still flickered at the edges of her memory sometimes, but they no longer held the power to terrify. They were a part of her story, a testament to the journey that had brought her here, to this place of improbable sanctuary. She moved with a newfound confidence, her steps lighter, her gaze steady. The work on the ranch continued, a comforting rhythm that marked the passage of seasons. She learned to ride Gideon, the old horse surprisingly gentle with her. She learned to plant a small vegetable garden near the cabin, coaxing life from the stubborn soil under Silas's patient tutelage. The first time she pulled a carrot from the earth, small and imperfect but undeniably hers, a thrill of pride shot through her. Silas watched her, his quiet approval her greatest reward. Their conversations remained sparse, but now they were imbued with an easy familiarity. Sometimes, in the evenings, he would tell her stories of his own youth, of the land when it was wilder, of people long gone. She, in turn, would occasionally share a snippet from her own fragmented past, the telling less painful now, cushioned by the safety of his presence. She learned that Silas had lost his own wife and young son to a fever many decades ago, a sorrow that had shaped his solitude but had not extinguished his capacity for love. His adoption of her was, in a way, a mending of his own broken past, a planting of new life in a field long fallow. One crisp autumn afternoon, they stood on a small rise overlooking the ranch, the pastures golden in the late afternoon sun, the forest a dark, brooding line in the distance, no longer a threat, but simply a part of the vast landscape. "Good land," Silas said, his voice a low rumble, more to himself than to her. Ilara nodded, breathing in the clean, cool air. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. A good home. She looked at the weathered cabin, the smoke curling from its chimney, the fences stretching out, defining their small, hard-won piece of the world. It wasn't grand, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. She reached out and slipped her small hand into Silas's rough, calloused one. He squeezed it gently, a rare, overt gesture of affection. In the fading light, the old rancher and the young girl stood side by side, two solitary souls who had found in each other an unexpected family, their roots intertwined, strong and deep, in the rich soil of shared resilience and quiet love. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full of all the words that didn't need to be spoken. Ilara Blackwood was home.